Good morning, everyone, and welcome. So we've got 10:32 now, and I've got 15 participants. I think we might have maybe one or two more that might join as we're starting the session. So what I was going to do, we're actually going to have it through our dialogue. We've got two guest panelists that I'm going to be introducing in a moment. And I was going to mute everyone right now except for the two panelists and myself. And then we're going to let the two panelists do their presentations. We're going to first have Dr. Ingerman do his presentation. I'll give you his introduction in a moment. And then we're going to have a small 5 to 6 minute Q&A after he finishes. I know he's got to actually drop off the call at maybe around 11 or so. So we're going to let him do his presentation. And then after that, we're going to have our second panelist kind of give us a presentation for maybe 15 minutes or so. And then we're going to have another brief 5 to 6 minute Q&A after that. And I'll make sure that I get a chance to mute everyone for those. Also, if you would, as we're going through the presentations from the panelists, if you have any questions, you can actually send it to us in the chat. And then we'll try to address as many as we can between now and 11:30. And whichever ones that we're not able to address, I'll make sure that I get your contact information and provide you contact information so that we can follow up a little bit more after our panel discussion. So I want to get ready to, let me go through and mute everyone, but can everyone mute their call right now except Dr. Matz and Dr. Ingerman, please? Excellent, excellent, looks great. And I'm also controlling the slides here on the PDF, so we'll just kind of slide through it, make sure it works here. Let's see. Good morning, my name is Bishara Abdul Hamid. I'm the founder and technology director for Hexagon Stem. We're an entrepreneurial startup located in Atlanta, Georgia, and we are committed to empowering our future with STEM. We do this by becoming global leaders in K-12, higher education, and corporate partnerships. And we use creativity and an interdisciplinary approach to the art and science of culturally relevant learning. We have 3 core competencies that we accomplish this with. That's coding, video production, and cybersecurity. I'm also the lead instructor for our coding program at Horizons Atlanta at Atlanta Technical College.
Wonderful.
Our dialogue, thank you. Our dialogue this morning is going to be on smart connected communities, unified through the engagement of educators with the K-12 population, with activities aimed at promoting purpose, motivation, and readiness towards engagement with STEM occupations. Our first panelist, and we're very excited to have him here, is Dr. Jason Engerman, and he's the professor of digital media technologies at East Stroudsburg University. And he's actually joining us this morning from Pennsylvania. So I'm very excited to have him here. He's actually going to be talking about a project that he worked on and received some grant funding related to culturally relevant computing activities and career readiness for at-risk youth. So Dr. Ingerman, whenever you're ready, if you wanna.
Yeah, how's it going? How's it going? Hey, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Everybody can hear me? I'm pretty sure you can. You're all muted.
Yes,
that's fantastic. Look, this is an incredible opportunity where we're getting together to be able to have community and convene. And I think that is really important to do with like-minded individuals and educators and people that care about our students. So the first thing I want to do is thank Hexagon Stem for putting this presentation on, Bishara for reaching out and allowing me to come and speak with you guys today, because this is what we do and what we want to share our thoughts and ideas in our own professional communities. That's really, really critical. Let me go over a little overview of myself a little bit, and then we'll dig down into something very specific. I was not really aware of what to expect, so my presentation is really direct. What I've focused on is a project that I am working on currently. It's still in the grits of it, as it is, the grits and the gravy of it. You know, we're elbow deep and knee deep in the project. But I want to talk about how I got there and how we got there. And as I frame this conversation, I think that it's going to be really, really, really powerful. The message that Charles has that'll come right inside of it and really talk about the specifics with his incredible experience. So again, my name is Dr. Jason Engerman. Born and raised in the Bronx, in the inner cities of the Bronx. I was raised right down the street from a fort. My experiences growing up were full of homeless people lining littering the streets, drug dealers at the corners, homeless people, like I said, all around me, and poverty all around me. And I was raised with my family, obviously, there in the Bronx. And then I migrated to Queens. Out of Queens, I spent a lot of times in YMCAs, and that's where I really got my experience as a mentor, coach, counselor. And I've spent 20 plus years since doing that type of work, mentoring, counseling, coaching. I moved that into a computer science minor at Penn State. I have completed coursework to be a minor. Then I got a math degree. I taught mathematics at Wallen Paul Peck High School for about 10 years. And in that experience, I went on to get the master's in education and then a PhD in learning design and technology. What learning design and technology does is it engineers understanding and optimizes human performance. It was out of the learning performance systems department. And so what we do is we take technology, we take people, and we take cultures and systems, and we bring them together to optimize human performance, whether it be for the medical field, whether it be for the Army, or the military, or others, mostly in training purposes, but also it could be applied in a variety of other ways. The majority of my research was in underrepresented populations and is in underrepresented populations in iterative and interactive technologies. So my dissertation was on boys and games. I looked at boys as an underrepresented population because of the several statistics that show us that boys are 4 times more likely to be expelled from schools, 3 times more likely to be suspended, 5 times more likely to be labeled ADHD, so forth and so on, in a predominantly female-oriented education system as a whole. And so I looked at that deeply and looked at Call of Duty, because Call of Duty was a game that was had a commercial representation, and it had a stigma about it, especially considering school shootings. And I found some really interesting things during a 4-year study, a longitudinal study of football players. What I found was that it was developmentally appropriate for boys from an anthropological, a sociological, and a primatological perspective to engage in themes of dominance and power. That was normal. And the ability to do that in a safe space was critical. It was not only normal, it was critical. It was necessary. Studies show us that when violent criminals are studied about their history and their childhood experiences, they lack the boundaries of understanding true violence from playful violence because they lack the ability to have safe, rough and tumble play with mentorship. It's one of the key ingredients that actually generates and engineers truly violent criminals in criminology. So this space was really important for them. And it led to many other elements of my findings, which include things like play and the importance of playfulness, the importance of owning flow. Flow meaning an experience where it's instinctual, an experience where you're feeling it, you're in the right place, and your movements and activities are instinctual. These are human things. And it was really important for their human development. Those were critical, and camaraderie, and how to engage and socialize with young peers that they saw as peers. So those were really, really creative and important. Go ahead, you can forward Bishara to the next slide. Okay, great. That just shows me. So This work then pushed me forward to really start to understand and break down and do a deep dive into, yeah, you can go there. That's fine. Thank you. Push forward and go into the places and spaces that Generation Z and Generation Alpha were digging into. Where were they located? Where are they? Especially in the age of Corona. We need to understand communities. We need to understand ecosystems. We need to understand where our young people are. Generation Z represents $130 billion spending power. That's $130 billion spending power that's moving into the markets. Okay, and we need to understand that power as we prepare young people for the world and the workforce, right? We always have this conversation of preparing students for the workforce, but we really need to understand the transformation of the workforce itself. So that led me to this space of esports. And esports is really important. Why? Because it has so many different layers of ecosystems where students are today. I've got a 6-year-old, he's 6 years old now, but when he was 3 years old, he always used to tell me, hey, Daddy, watch me play YouTube. Watch me play YouTube. That's what he did, you know, when he was left alone, when he was looking at his iPad. Watch me play YouTube. So esports is really important. I did, right? Yeah, hours and hours and hours of their face in a screen, which, you know, for good or bad doesn't matter. But let me tell you, this is a teacher. How many of you guys are going to take away all the mobile devices from your students? I'll wait. they ain't going anywhere. Okay, as much as you wanna sit on an ivory tower, these technologies, the access ain't going nowhere, and there's nothing you can do about it. The only thing to do is get on board and become enlightened and become, you know, informed. So let's talk about esports, and then I'll talk about the connection between smart communities and what we're talking about here, especially with underrepresented populations. So esports is huge. It's competitive engagement in sports and digital sports and computer sports. You can look at them like NBA 2K, right? I take traditional sports and I bring it into a digital space. It could be Madden, where I take football and I bring it into a digital space and I compete. But also it could be capture the flag. We all remember capture the flag, right? But what if I play capture the flag with dragons and trolls? I got League of Legends. I got Dota. Okay, 5v5. What if we play laser tag and we bring it into a digital space? Then I've got Call of Duty. Then I've got Overwatch. Okay, and I've got all these different forms of that. And so this digital space is where they reside. They spend 7 to 9 hours on it daily anyway. Now it's more like 16 because we all know that. And what's really important is where it resides now. 50 plus professional teams, and I'm talking about athletic teams. I'm talking about the soccers, the NBAs, the NFLs. They own teams. They own esports teams. They're engaged in esports. 50 plus non-endemic brands, you see them there, are engaged in this space. They understand that it's a $1.2 billion engine that has generated 17%, has been growing 17% year over year for the past 5 years. It's incredible. It's got 500 million plus unique users around the world. League of Legends had 100 million viewers for its championship, 100 million. That's Super Bowl status. Super Bowl's been around for much longer than League of Legends, but 100 million people watched it. In higher education, we see 70 plus programs that are engaging in esports, whether they're building a team, building clubs, engaging in the collegiate units and organizations. Esports is not something that's been stuck in a corner anymore. It's out mainstream and it is booming and it is thriving in this type of environment because it's online. It defies digital boundary, physical boundaries, right? Geographical boundaries. And this is the new age of work. It represents the new age of work, remote work, telecommunications, co-location practices, ecosystems, different ecosystems. There are 5 different esports genres, we can call it. For one, first-person shooters. Another one is sports games. You've got real-time strategy games. You've got MOBAs, which are multiplayer online battle arenas. And then you've got fighting games. And all of these are unique in and of themselves. And what they do is they allow what I said before, camaraderie, peer development, peer engagement, flow, all of these things that are not just a teenage, you know, adolescence, but human. It represents humanity, right? It represents communities and affinity spaces. It's like water. All right, let's go down to the next one, Bashara.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. All right, so here's the ecosystem. We talk about ecosystems is really important. It's tribal. It's tribal. All right. I work out of a theory called cultural responsive computing. Lance and Billings began that work back in the early 90s. And it basically has 3 components. Now it's evolved that are really important. The first is connection. And the second are asset building. And the third is reflection. Okay. I know that's not on the picture that you see now, but I'll bring that in a second. When we talk about culturally responsive computing, we talk about first understanding where they are. And since we're all teachers, we understand zones of proximal development, taking them from where they are to where we would like them to be or where they need to be, right? Understanding that they exist within these digital safe havens, within these digital affinity spaces. This is where they belong. This is their crew. These are their peers. This is where they reside. We want to talk about the Ecology system that I developed as a result of my research. It is where they spend the most time and have the most connection. It's where they play, where they are the most likely to be themselves. And again, this is human. It used to be in the physical sense, right? We understand it in a physical sense, but now for Generation Z and Generation Alpha, it's more and more in a digital landscape that we must respect. And so for my entrepreneur, we can then understand this chart a bit clearer as it relates and maps to business, because in this esports ecosystem, it is not only interactive, interdisciplinary, it's global. So it adds another layer of complexity. And so we have all these players beginning from the left with the publishers, the people that actually build the games, owning the IP, owning the share and the licensing. And then we move to the publishers either creating leagues and competitions themselves here in the middle. That's the leagues in the middle. They create the leagues. And then we have players and influencers and platforms. And then this is an audience-driven entertainment space. So all these pieces come together through this 2017 really great ecosystem that I like to talk about, to say that the community already exists. The community is smart. It's making the decisions as a group, as a collective, democratically. But we need to understand, if we're talking about underrepresented populations, is where do they fit in and where are the power structures? How can they then use these as levers, own them, and then generate them themselves? So I engaged in a project. We can go to the next slide. And I'm going to wrap this up. Can we go to the next slide?
Yeah, that's great. All right, excellent.
Okay, great.
Here we go.
So this is how I'll wrap it up, which is, I then said, look, we've got to engage in a space, in a place that allows us to allow underrepresented populations. The underrepresented population that I'm looking at are students and young people that are homeless, they're in foster care, they're out of home placement, out of school placement. If we can help that population leverage the ecosystems within esports that I mentioned before, and their natural technological tools that they use, such as Twitch specifically, and controllers and STEM and the design. I talked about the publishers and developers. If we can have them use those tools from a computer game design perspective, from a graphics perspective, from a video production perspective, and a digital media marketing perspective, we can have them own and develop and build through those tools. Then we can give them hope, obviously, but also a new way of looking at teaching and learning that allows them to leverage the native ecosystems that they engage in. The connection, there is a connection already. Asset building, they're building assets. And reflection, they get to reflect on these opportunities. In fact, what you're seeing here in terms of pictures is a pilot that we did where we had our students run an entire event. It was called the Provost Colloquium. We had freshmen running $10,000 4K switcher. We had other freshmen running around as production managers, running the ones and twos. We have, he's holding a mobile he's got a 4K camera in his hand, and he's wearing a harness. And then we had them doing a communication side. We had them do all these projects. It was 20 of them that we had in that space. From there, we've done many other projects that I didn't share here, but we've done many other projects in between to help develop a creative media factory team to actually be a business and be a digital media marketing business for esports. And we've had them actually connect with professionals. And right now they're in the process of building that platform to actually broadcast that to the world. So this project, which we'll probably execute next year, we'll look at how do we create living, learning communities, smart communities through a camp format to collect information about how esports may be used as a tool and a vehicle to push forward a digital, digital skills for a new digital grid.
Wonderful, Jason. Brilliant.
Excellent. Yeah. So I do have a question. It's asking, what is DMM? Was that?
Digital media marketing. Great question. Digital media marketing.
And so I had a question for you, Dr. Ingerman.
Mm-hmm.
So as far as your research is concerned, were there some barriers that you came across? I know we talked about having it where certain things are systematic as you're trying to move forward. Were there certain specific barriers?
Yes. Accessing a transient population is a huge barrier. We have 48 slots that we have to fill, and I thought it would be much easier for these students to be interested, first of all, but then have access to them. That was a barrier. The other barrier too is accessing brands and people within the industry that many of them want to help. They're just not sure the extent to which they can give access to their IP, even for a noteworthy cause as this. So I didn't think that would be such a big deal, but IP is really important. And it just reinforces what I knew from the beginning, which is that if you want these students to thrive, they need to build everything from scratch. Which is what Charles is going to talk about in a minute here. But they've got to build it from scratch themselves and own it from the ground up because they cannot really rely on even industry. And I thought it was an easy sell. Look, you need a pipeline of talent, right? Don't you want to help this talent develop? You want this talent to be groomed for you, like Google. And Google's like, well, we could just build our own platform and then, and then everyone will just come to us on our terms, which is it's a great business move. This is a boss move, but you got to really understand your talent pool and you need to really groom your talent pool. And it's one that I think we're talking from a business perspective. From a business perspective, then it is a sin of the US to not invest internally.
Certainly.
Instead of the option of cheap labor. Look, invest internally and really build in the skills from the ground up. Linux should have schools. Linux, the operating system, is an open platform. I'm talking to many of those guys, project managers. They should have schools, period.
And so I've got another question that's coming in through the chat as well, Dr. Ingerman. It says, what is the target age and what is the recruitment process? How do students get involved?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we are targeting our locale right now. We are Northeast Pennsylvania, and we want 16 and 19-year-olds at this moment in time, and they have to be homeless at any point in time, foster care at any point in time, out of school placement, adjudicated at any point in time, if they've had that experience at any point in time, but they need to be 16 to 19. We need them a little bit older without repetitive behavioral issues because we don't have the capacity to support that at this moment. And this is an exploratory grant. So this is the second NSF esports grant that exists ever. It's exploratory.
Thank you.
Okay. What suggestions do you have to begin grooming the talent pool at elementary? Yes, that's one of my favorite questions. Minecraft. Minecraft, the end. Now, Minecraft has so much opportunity. It's so young people friendly. It is, and it has it has modules that you can actually build, rebuild the game and design the game from the inside. So grooming students and grooming them early is really important. I've got my 6-year-old right now using free open source tools, and he's using Scratch Junior. He just completed his 2nd game. And what's really important is after they go through the process of maybe looking at YouTube or actually first they have to build some digital sense first. So they've got to just play with the tool first, Scratch Junior. Scratch Junior is free, get access to it. I know right now we can't go to libraries, but if you have a desktop, if you have a laptop, you can download it for free and get them to get some concepts of print, as it were. It's concepts of digital first, and then you move them on through a progression through video, YouTube possibly. And then at the top end, you have to publish. They have to publish. They have to publish. And what publish simply means is make it public. It's not complicated. It is taking the idea, posting it to YouTube, create a channel, post it to you. They have to go through the process of explaining what they made and how they've done it. I've got a 6-year-old. He's in my house. He's been with me for a long time. He is awful at this. I'm going to be honest with you. He's terrible. He's terrible. He's not great at public speaking right now. He is not good at articulating what he does right now, but I'm going to pound the pavement, and I know that it's important for him to do so. And he's got to engage in that process, because he's got to be able to have the pressure of reflection in that process. And so that's really important to publish. So I got one more question. I've got to go. I'm sorry. How many hours of screen time a day is this platform encouraged? So let's say, that's a tough question. It's going to take me longer than a minute. I'll give you the short version. I do a half hour with him. I do no more than a half hour. Let's put it that way. So that's what I do. I don't think that at one point in time, you can just continue to do the same thing over and over, even lifting, right? Like lifting weights and stuff.
Exactly.
It's not a good idea to do for 8 hours, right? So you got to use some common sense there. A half hour with him, and it's a focused half hour. So actually 20 minutes is ideal, because that is the length of time in which we as humans can actually pay attention to one thing. So I would love to continue the conversation. Bishara has my contact information. You are more than welcome to reach out to me. I'd love to continue the conversation with each and every one of you at a mutually beneficial time.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ingerman. We really appreciate that.
Appreciate
excellent presentation.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Matz. Take care, all.
Good to see you.
And just as a segue, as you're heading out, so we're good, Dr. Ingerman. I know you got to get ready to go. I know you got something with the family that you got to take care of, so we appreciate it.
Take care, all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
We'll speak soon.
Well.
And so I just wanted to follow up and say that last summer, we actually started at Horizons Atlanta Technical College. We started implementing Scratch Junior with our 2nd grade students. I think it was 2nd and 4th grade students that we had there. And it was an hour of coding. And so the purpose of that was to, again, start engaging them with things that they're already familiar with, that they're very comfortable with. That's already something from within the environment that they're already playing with at home. And then just making sure that we're building those critical thinking skills and preparing them for the next stage of things. We've actually got it set up this summer where we're actually going to be implementing Minecraft. And because that's something that we'll be able to do on the virtual platform, it's going to work extremely well in terms of building that ecosystem and introducing the students to these publishing and the things that Dr. Ingerman was talking about early on and often. So excellent. Thank you.
Fantastic.
So, and so now we actually have Dr. Charles Matz, who is an associate professor and director for the Center of Data Visualization from New York Institute of Technology. And he's actually joining us from New York City right now. So hopefully he can give us a little bit more information about what he's going to be talking about as far as his presentation, a little bit more information on your background, please. Dr. Charles Matz.
What I'm going to ask is if I could share my screen, if that works for you.
Yeah, certainly, of course.
Okay,
please.
Let me see if I can do it. Let's see.
I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Yep, okay. And I'll share mine. There we are.
That looks
and
perfect.
You will let me know if you can see it, because you never know what's on the other end of this thing. So yeah.
Yeah, I can see it perfectly.
Good morning, folks. I just wanted to pick up on a few of the themes that Jason had put forward and really just talk about a toolbox, very simple toolbox. And I'm going to discuss 3 tools in particular. But first, I think it's important you know where your information is coming from. So I'll give you a 2-second monologue on where this information is sourced from and what my background is. Very simply, the sort of projects that I get involved in mostly involve the built environment. And so there's a lot of systems that connect communities, built environment, the digital world, the internet, and so forth. And the 3 tools I want to talk about are the 3 tools of what is called a live project format, what I'm calling vertical age integration, which is the inclusion of a variety of different stakeholders of different age groups within a project. And also the much more interesting and sticky problem that Jason was talking about, which is accessing value chains as educators. And so those are the 3 themes. Now, I know a little bit about this stuff because I have 3 hats of my own that I wear. Very specifically, I direct the Center for Data Visualization, but I also direct a design school on 3 campuses. One is in the United Arab Emirates, and the other 2 are in New York City. So a lot of this comes from design thinking. This kind of educational approach comes from design thinking. And also, I have a bit of business background, running business units that have their center in arts and culture mostly, and tech development. And lastly, I have a research line, which is education and complex systems, specifically sociological systems and organizational theory. So that's where the information is coming from. On a personal level, I think it's important to note, and I've shared this with Bitra and Jason, that I was raised in Europe. I came to New York in the early 70s, late 60s, early 70s, and continued my education as a human being in New York City. And I was put in a school in New York City in which I was able to complete my public school education. And then I went and lived and worked in Africa and lived and worked in other places in Europe. So the research that I'm conducting mostly includes the rest of the world. And there's a lot of it which is domestic, but I also wanted to talk about the perspective of getting outside of the comfort zone of the United States and looking at what other people are doing in other parts of the world, because I think there's important lessons there as educators for all of us. The first typology of project I wanted to talk about was what's called a live project, which is that any educational initiative that you attempt should have a real world application, no matter what the age group you're working with. I'm going to profile a case study. This is a project that we did in a community called Hackney, which is in the United Kingdom. It is a neighborhood which is on the fringes of what was the Olympic site. So an inordinate amount of resources was poured into the Olympic site in London. And of course, the marginal community adjacent to it was left pretty much to fend for itself. It's a classic case study in the allocation of resources with white privilege at the top of the food chain, heading down towards the classic cross-section of that this is a global problem. And this is not only occurring in the United States, but this asymmetry in communities is happening all over the place, in most major cities in Europe especially. The community in Hackney for about 30 years was a community which was not invested in and subjected to the worst kind of exploitation you can imagine, from trash dumps to recycling centers, to pollutants, et cetera. There are a couple of big gas containers there. And because of the Olympic site conversion, a number of initiatives were put forward by the mayor of London, who happens to be in his first term and was very famously looking for solutions to how to deal with some of these, what we might call inner city problems, but mostly as a way to bolster his own position and to get votes. This particular project is a project that includes all three elements that I mentioned, which is that it's a live project, that is, it has a real world application. It includes a cross-section of age groups and also includes access to the value chain. What we see here is that when you're doing any kind of instruction at this level, STEM level instruction, even in a public school with young children, you really need to engage the community in a very substantial way. So these projects typically last between 1 and 2 months, sometimes 3 months during the duration of a semester. So they arc across the boundary of the semester and have beginning, middle, and end. And as you can see here, basically in this particular project, we had solicited a real estate owner who had a recycling center, who had a vacant building, an institution, which was a community center, a second institution, which was a holding company essentially for a series of public schools with the inclusion of 2 private schools, and the local merchants of the community, and of course the mayor's office. The project centered on the integration of geospatial technologies with built environment issues. So in this slide, you see a series of buildings that was donated to the project by a developer who eventually was going to have the buildings torn down. So this gave the group that was involved access to a series of vacant buildings in which to build essentially temporary projects in. Now, all of this was modeled and done digitally in advance. So what's interesting about this project is it has both a virtual application and a real-life physical application. In this case, the borough of Hackney, which is where this project so it's got its roots, wanted to solicit the mayor's office for redevelopment funds, and the educational project that came out of it was a direct result of those negotiations. So what I'm suggesting here is that as educators, you cannot limit yourself to the classroom or to the institution that you're in, that you have to include the rest of the community, the various merchants, the stakeholders. And of course, that's easy to say, but it requires a lot of energy, and you have to rally the troops on a number of different levels. Now, what happened here is that the vacant building had to be restructured over a period of 3 weeks. Students essentially proposed digital solutions to what would happen, and then eventually this project was actually constructed. What's interesting about the project is that it included what I'll call vertical age integration, which is that it included very young students at grade school level all the way through the various levels of education, including, and I left this off the list, post-grad. There were a number of postgrads who were involved who were also exploiting the project for a way to gain portfolio material for their PhD studies as well. But it included also the elders of the community and a number of groups that represented cross-sectional age groups. Now, what's interesting is I find these projects to be much more difficult to accomplish in the United States because there's a lot of timidity around having young children cross boundaries in terms of age groups. This is very common in other cultures. It's very common in Europe, and certainly in my work in Africa and the Middle East. It's also very common. The projects are engaged at a number of different age groups. In this particular project, students were coding, and then other students of different age groups were actually executing the work physically. So there was value across the activity in terms of what the result was. And at the end, all of the review processes, that is what you might call the learning outcomes, or what you might call the metrics by United States standards, were evaluated by the group across this cross-section of ages, and all the value was extracted at all levels. So in this slide, actually, this was from the final presentation in which on the ceiling, a student, a young high school freshman, had designed an app in which they were hacking the surveillance cameras that the City of London had put around the neighborhood, and they were projecting them on the ceiling, and essentially that they were making a kind of theater out of it. On the bottom of the slide, people were sitting around on beanbag chairs, and this was actually in one of the vacant buildings that was being commandeered, that was donated by the developer, and then this was open to the public. So actually, they sold tickets. People came in here. There was a small cafe that was set up by junior high school students. There was a school that was teaching also chef skills, et cetera, and then there was also performance school. So this is a kind of mashup of performance, tech, culture, and also extracting commercial value out of it. And all of this was taught across the age groups. Now, the third segment, what I'd like to propose in the toolbox, again, is accessing value chains. And what I mean by this is that when you run a program and you're teaching a particular STEM subject matter, it's important that you think about going up and down the value chain. What do I mean by that? I mean that if you're teaching something like coding, and that coding has a result, that you should find a partner up the value chain that can provide an input for that coding, and then look for partners along the value chain who can give you other elements, including what I call process D here, which is an extraction of value, which is at some point, the object that you're creating at the digital level then gets made physical. Now, this is very interesting. There are a number of tools for educators that are out there that are not widely publicized. In this particular case, I'm showcasing one by the British Council. There are equivalents in the United States and across the world. And these are open to all people. So in other words, United States educators have access to this, which is that you have a number of different organizations that have signed up for access to things like open source software, open source production facilities where physical things can be made. In other words, you can design an object in one place and digitally send it to any one of the members of this, in this case, Maker Library Network, and have it manufactured in another part of the world. So in this project, we had students in Senegal coding, designing three-dimensional CNC panel cutouts. They designed the furniture, the chairs. They contacted a Chinese flat pack company. We made a commission deal with that company in which no money was exchanged. It was on order. And then these chairs by a junior high school group were packaged and marketed in Paris, and they were sold in Paris stores. In other words, all the revenue from those sales actually went back to the coding group at all levels, including grade school students. We're extracting value from this. Now, what you have to realize is that the only reason this can happen is because of access to the web. And so web connectivity is a big deal. And there's a lot of power grab right now in different countries in Africa over what the actual location is of who's going to actually end up with the reins for access to the web and what that's going to look like. This includes this kind of participation, all thresholds of engagement. In this case, we had Mr. Guinao, who is doing 3D printing robots out of found parts. We also have Sidin Dao from the University of Dakar teaching coding for robotics at all age groups. All of this coding, all of this output is then put in that value chain that I mentioned before and is distributed throughout the world, either by product or by merchant sales. In the east of Africa, we also have these initiatives going on also in the north. This is in the University of Mekelle in northern Ethiopia, in which they're doing coding and robotics as well for agricultural applications. Now, if I were to summarize the value chain proposition, instead of positioning yourselves in the middle in an isolated project based on theory and simply where the learning outcomes are restricted to the classroom, I would strongly recommend this international toolbox of those three factors. And here I've positioned the instruction at the front end of the value chain. And for that particular project of the flat pack furnishings, we had integration, which there was an online rollout. There was a manufacturing deal made with the group. There was market interaction, so students were learning how to engage value chains that had to do with economics of distribution and ownership of IP. And finally, the market return. In other words, there has to be some tangible result at the end, not just blog entries or a product to show up the line to, let's say, accreditation agencies. This is a real world application. So the three tools actually include things that I would summarize as being dynamic tools. They all relate to each other, and they are accessible through really team interaction between educators at all levels. And I would encourage people to engage a global view of the networks because they're out there. And of course, the United States is positioned among all other countries to have an enormous amount of resources that people want. And so you will find that people are very amenable to collaboration. So I'm wondering if anybody has any questions about this particular set of tools that I presented today.
Certainly, and we're gonna put those in the chat box. Okay. Good, I'm listening. I'm sorry, Professor Matz.
I was just going to summarize. The first tool would be live project, the idea of real world application. The second tool is to encourage age group variation within the project and encourage elders to be a part of it, because also coding is valuable for folks who have not had the opportunity to get in and learn digital skills, and that kind of cross collaboration is really helpful. And the last tool is to access value chains of manufacturing, digital distribution, digital marketing, et cetera. And this, of course, ties directly into what Jason's proposal is actually, is to become much more savvy about taking control of those particular tool sets and flexing them as educators. Yes, Bishra.
Yeah, excellent. So one of the things that I'd like to do outside of thanking you for the amazing presentation and proposals is, just to point out that one of the things, one of the reasons why I brought you on as one of the panelists and asked if you would come on to assist with this is because we really were looking to make sure that we were bringing a global perspective to our students and making sure that we engage them early on. We say that it's student-centered learning, and it's about making sure that we engage our students, but we also want to make sure that they've definitely got a global perspective. And not only that, also making sure that, their intellectual property, the things that they're learning, the things that they're producing, it has some value. It has some value. Outside of just knowing it, there's something that they can do to make sure that they're producing something. So, yeah.
I would say that in this day, more than any other age, it's really incumbent on leadership, especially educational leadership, to encourage young people to understand the notion of intellectual property, because that's really where things are going to be at very soon. In other words, if I think of the exploitation of intellectual property within the community, by various stakeholders in the United States, and you think of just the music business or, for example, the arts in general, the value of that intellectual property is astronomical. In fact, I would argue that the United States wouldn't be the powerhouse it was in the world without that intellectual property. Everybody wants a piece of it. Everybody wants to have the magic of the community and the intellectual property of the community. So I would say that it's absolutely crucial that anybody who's educating these days plug into the global networks, because it has to be a two-way exchange. I mean, you can't imagine the kind of reaction people have when you simply propose that you will bring a group that has had the experience of being in particular neighborhoods or in particular communities abroad, because of course they're going to see themselves in that in so many different ways, from legacies of post-colonial domination to all kinds of other systems, economic systems that are in place. And one of the important things that I would also note is that if you are in an institution that has any kind of power base, you know, Jason and I were talking earlier, the solutions to the problem in the community not only have to reside in the community. In fact, I would argue that they will only change when people get interested outside. And if the discussion of white privilege isn't discussed thoroughly and with honesty at the level of institutions, it's very, very, very difficult to see how that's going to work as a solo project. That's just not going to happen. So these are all tools that bring those matters to light, discuss them openly and transparently among stakeholders, including young people, so that they understand the systems they're dealing with and understand how to get over them as well, how to get over those challenges. And that goes for any community that you involve in this particular process.
Certainly. So we do have the one first question for you, Professor Matz. It says, where do we even start finding our community's value chain? Like, where should we reach out to first was the question that we had.
So there are a number of scholars who have come out of the Black community, certainly in a whole host of different, that hold very, very key positions in terms of theory and in terms of scholarship. That, you know, the kind of information you're going to get from Jason is, you know, where that material has been polished to such a high level that any kind of attempt that you make to actualize it, you will have a much higher success rate. So what I would say is that you need to get in touch with scholars. It's all networks. So, you know, if you reach out to Vishra and he reaches out to me and I reach out to Jason and we all put our heads together, we can find the person that can answer the question if you have a particular item that you want to work on. The way you look at value chain, simply put, is you look up and down the food chain of whatever it is that's being exploited at the moment. So if I look at the music business, for example, you have the music business value chain, but that's not the only value chain. That's one that's discussed a lot because it's always in the press, and so is sports. But there are value chains all over the community that can be looked at and examined for where you can go up and down those chains to see what you need to get a hold of. It's very simple. If you can make your own material, if you can process your own material, if you can pack your own material, if you can distribute your own material, if you can market it, if you can create the message for it, if you can put it out on the internet, if you have access to the web, the tools for coding, the tools for programming, the tools to put websites up, these are all things that young people are very good at, much better actually than some of the senior members of the educational system. And what I'll say, there's a lot to learn from that, you know, and the moment that the rubber hits the road is when you begin talking about intellectual property. The fact that you can hang on to that ownership and also magnify it through the web. You know, if you, I'll give you a good example. We tried one of these with a very simple application in which we had grade school students from a school in inner city London contact a Chinese manufacturing company that was willing to put on consignment keychains. They designed the keychain digitally. They learned how to code. They learned how to do three-dimensional modeling. They sent the files to China. They negotiated all their own deals. It was on order. So they got themselves an account, a PayPal account. That PayPal account went into a fund. The fund was split up amongst the family members of the children that were involved. These are really, really, really useful, tangible things that people can do to put one-to-one value to education. You're being educated, you have a certain set of skills that are both theoretical and practical, and then you can actually own and reap the rewards of it. I can tell you that the access to the web is key. And so there are a number of factors in terms of how you interact with the web and interact with digital technologies that's at the base of that have to be looked at. Value chains are very interesting frameworks. for people to study, especially educators. If I ask any one of you, if you were to print your own textbooks or process your own textbooks and have them available online, you would be accessing the value chain one step up from where you might be right now, instead of waiting for a Springer or a Routledge to ask you, well, can you write me an article on something? And people are publishing these days. Many people are aware of self-publishing. There's no reason why you can't publish yourself and put yourself online and build educational structures around it.
Certainly. So we have another question that's here on the chat. It says, how do you introduce a global view to middle school questions? And what kinds of projects can they do to maybe enhance their global perspective of things?
Great question. It all starts with a visceral. It has to be action adventure at that level. It has to have a kind of physicality to it. People in a room interacting with folks from another country. If it's, as I said, they immediately are going to have shared experiences and common issues that they're dealing with. And of course, you know, they used to have things like pen pal letters. Now people are on social media, but there's no substitute for a structured educational framework for social media. In other words, this business of guiding students implicitly through a journey is something you have to create as an educator. You have to build the experience. You have to build the theatricality of the experience. And so I would answer the question by saying you have to be like almost like a stage manager. And everybody who teaches knows that there's some aspect of this which is true, but never more so when you're dealing with a live project or when you're dealing with a project that has external value chains or has an endpoint that has a real output. So for example, if you tell students we're going to build a spot to meet in for social reasons, you know, at the end of the summer when all this is over, and that's a very real thing that they're going to be after. And then you're going to ask them, we're going to build that, taking in the viewpoints of somebody from another country. And then you say, okay, well, that's a sister project. They're going to build the same thing in their country. Suddenly that becomes visceral, it becomes active, right? So
certainly. So that's interesting because one of the program initiatives that we're going to be trying to look at, and I'm just going to put it forward, is to have it where we've got kind of like a global exchange program.
Wonderful.
And this entire virtual learning environment has made that conversation a lot easier for people who are interested in having this global perspective. And so what we're going to try to do is try to see if we can get a program where some of the elementary and middle grade students are able to actually engage in STEM programs. Like, for example, there's one in Ghana, and I've actually been in communication with the STEM program there, and trying to have it where we can get students in the US and students in Ghana to maybe collaborate and start conversations about something that's been affecting everybody globally. Maybe even have it where we start working on a coding program that, we start to understand, respirator design, and have it where students in Ghana try to figure out how they're addressing that particular issue of that design or some of their coding techniques, and how they can share that with our students here, even at Horizons Atlanta. So, I mean, that's one of the ways that we can also make sure that we're trying to introduce a global view by just reaching out to other programs that are already doing that, around the world. So. Right.
Ghana is great because it's an Anglophone country, but I would also encourage young students to reach out, educators to have their students reach out to Francophone, Spanish-speaking countries. I mean, you can run the gamut, because then it gives them also the experience of learning the languages and so forth. And it could be the Far East, it could be the Middle East, Arabic, it could be Senegal, it's Francophone. And of course, there are plenty of students there who are going to speak English, but the idea is to expose people to different language methodologies, because people think differently in different language. So it's interesting. I see that I'm running up against the time wall, so I'm going to
Yes.
leave you all. And it's been a real pleasure. Like I said, if anybody has any questions for me, I took some notes down, and I look forward to hearing from all of you. Again, you want to know about value chains, just call me. I'll tell you all about it. And if you have a project, I'll be very happy to participate and give you information on that. That goes for both education and for things like startups and tech. So
Certainly. Certainly.
all right.
Thank you so much, Professor Matz. And again, we're going to be able to provide information where everyone's able to get in contact with yourself, Dr. Ingerman. I'm going to make sure I provide my information. I'm going to get everybody's information that's on this chat right now to make sure that we're able to stay in communication and continue to build and evolve. Thank you so much. I appreciate the time. It was excellent.
Bye-bye. Take care.
Bye-bye. And so for everyone else that's on the call, I know that I think that we're going to be going back into the main meeting room. And so once you leave out of this meeting session, you should be able to log back into the initial link, and that'll take you back into the primary meeting so we can get ready to wrap up. Thank you so much. I really appreciated all of your time and the questions that we have. And like I said, this is just the beginning of a number of conversations that we're going to have so that, again, we can continue to engage our students in a real way. Give them a global perspective, as well as making sure that, you know, they're engaging their communities in a smart and connected way. Thank you very much.